Internet! Today I am here to share with you my least favorite slash most disappointing books of 2018. The books on this list, some of them are books I genuinely didn't like. I have a few books that I DNF'd that I'm going to talk about as well. But some of them were disappointing in that I didn't like them as much as I thought I would. So they're kind of on here for various reasons, and I'll explain those reasons as I go through them. I have 8 books that I read that were disappointments, and I have 4 books that I DNF'd this year. Unfortunately, 3 of the 4 books I DNF'd were actually on my top 10 list of 2018 like books to read, which sucks. But I'm going to start with the books that I DNF'd, and then I'm going to go through my least favorite books. These aren't really ranked. I'm just basically going to talk about them in the order that I read them. So first off, let's start with the books I DNF'd. I actually don't own most of these anymore. But the first book I DNF'd in the year was Wayfarer by Alexander Bracken. This is the second book in Alexander Bracken's Passenger duology. I read Passenger back in 2017, and I liked it. It wasn't like a favorite or anything, but I did enjoy it, and I was curious to read the second book. It's about time travel and it has a lot of historical fiction elements to it. It was a decent book, but I think my problem with Wayfarer is that I waited too long to read it. And when I went into Wayfarer, I realized I'd forgotten so much of what happened, and I thought, okay, well, it wasn't that complicated of a book. I'm gonna remember things and then I'll get sucked into it, and I really just never got sucked into it. I got about almost to the halfway point before I finally decided to just let it go because I wasn't enjoying it. I really still didn't remember enough of what was going on, and I didn't like Passenger enough to warrant rereading it just so I could read Wayfarer. So I just decided to let it go. I know that a lot of people enjoy this duology, and like I said, I liked the first book, and maybe if I had read Wayfarer right after reading Passenger, I would have liked it too, but it just wasn't worth my time at that point. And Wayfarer was also one of the books on my top 10 list of books to read in 2018. The second book that I DNF'd in 2018 was Flame in the Mist by Renee Ahdieh. I was so sad to not like this book. I didn't get very far into it. I really wanted to like this book. I can't tell you anything about what I read. I read very little of it, and I was just so bored. So I don't even really remember a whole lot of what it was about. There's just something about Renee Ahdieh's writing style that I struggle with. And I know a lot of people love her writing style, and I think she's a really cool person because I follow her online and I think she's really cool, but I struggled with the Wrath and the Dawn duology. I liked the first book, I really didn't like the second book, and then I didn't like this book. I haven't decided if I've necessarily given up on Renee Ahdieh at this point, but her writing style just really doesn't mesh with me that well, which is unfortunate. I just couldn't get into this one. The third book I DNF'd was Truth Witch by Susan Dennard. I started listening to this one on audio, and I just was bored, and I decided that I didn't want to continue on. This was another one that was on my top 10 list, and I really wanted to like it, and I listened to quite a bit of it before I just gave up on it, but I really just didn't care about what was going on. I was bored with the storyline. It just wasn't for me. The series just wasn't for me, and that's okay. And the fourth book I DNF'd was Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I tried so hard with this one. I actually read over half of it, and I reached the point where I was only reading it because I wanted to just get done with it so I could read something else, because I just could not get into the story. I think that Laini Taylor has a really pretty writing style, and I liked that, and that's what got me to read as much of it as I did. I think I got to like page 280 something before I finally called it quits, but I wasn't into the story. I really didn't like the characters that much. I liked the main character, but I didn't care about what was going on. I didn't. When it comes to like paranormal type fantasy like this, I really do struggle with it. It's not really my genre of choice, but I wanted to give this one a try because I'd heard so many good things about it, and it wasn't for me. And I know that will probably shock some people, because a lot of people love this series, and that's great. I definitely understand why people like it. Like, I get that. It wasn't for me. And this was another one on my top 10 list that I didn't like. I still really want to read Strange the Dreamer, but this series just wasn't my taste. So those are the 4 books I DNF'd, and now I'm going to jump into the books that I did read that were disappointing for one reason or another. The first book is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I read this pretty early in the year, I think maybe during the first month, and I just didn't really care for the story. I struggle with classics sometimes that are kind of written in this era, and usually it's because of the way it's written, but in this case, I actually really liked Emily Bronte's writing style. I just didn't like the story. I didn't like the characters. It was easy enough to read, but I just didn't really like it that much. I gave it a pretty low rating. I probably won't read it again. I may watch the movie. I've heard the movie's good. But in this case, I really just didn't care for the book that much. The next book is probably going to be a surprise for some people, as this is a very beloved series on BookTube. But the next book on my disappointing reads list is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Raven cycle, and I honestly just didn't like this one. I started reading The Raven Boys in 2018 because The Raven Boys was on my top 10 list of books to read, and I liked The Raven Boys a lot. I struggled a lot through this one. I was so bored. I started reading it in the physical format, could not talk myself into picking it up, so I finished it on audio, which got me through it, but I still didn't care for it very much. It was extremely disappointing to me after reading The Raven Boys, and I was surprised at how much I disliked it, because for a lot of people that love that series, this is their favorite book in that series. So I'm not sure what happened with me, but I just was really disappointed by this book. I'm having a really hard time motivating myself into picking up the third book, Blue Lily Lily Blue. So be honest with me in the comments. For those of you that have read the series, if I dislike The Dream Thieves, am I going to like Blue Lily Lily Blue? Be honest with me. Tell me in the comments. Because I'm trying to decide if I want to even continue on with the series, or if I really just need to like make myself read the third book. So yes, unfortunately this book made the list, which makes me really sad. But be honest with me and let me know if you think I will like the third book based on my dislike for this one. The next book on this list is actually one I don't own anymore, and that book is The Girls by Emma Cline. This book, just didn't like it. It's kind of almost a retelling of the Charles Manson murders type thing and his cult. Or maybe a reimagining is a better word for this. I didn't like this book. I gave it a very low rating. I had a hard time finishing it. I almost DNF'd it, but I wanted to see how it ended. It's an adult book. I guess you could call it like a thriller, or even like historical fiction thriller. I didn't really care for the writing style that much. I thought that it flipped back and forth between the past and the present in ways that didn't make sense, and a lot of what was happening in the present it just was weird and random, and it didn't flow well, in my opinion. This book did not flow well. I hated it. I hated this book. I absolutely hated it, which made me very sad because it was so hyped when it first came out, and even a few people I know that have read it really liked it. I fucking hated this book. That's all I'm gonna say about it. The next two books are actually by the same author, but they're on this list for different reasons. The next book is Furthermore by Tara Mafi. This is a middle grade story. It's about this girl named Alice who lives in a very, very colorful world, but she herself has no color. And she ends up going into this world called Furthermore to find her father. This book was just a little too whimsical for me. I like a little bit of whimsy, and I've definitely enjoyed some very whimsical books, but this one was a little bit too much for me, and I struggled with it. I definitely see the appeal, and I think if I had read it when I was younger, I may have liked it, which that's the intended audience. It's a middle grade book, so that makes sense. But for me, it just wasn't really, it just wasn't my taste. For this one, the reason it made the list is because I was disappointed, because I thought I would enjoy it more than I did. And I mentioned that the next two books were from the same author, so I have another Tara Mafi book, and that's Shatter Me by Tara Mafi. Now, I liked this book. Before you go at me in the comments, I actually liked this book. The problem with it is that I didn't like it near as much as I thought I would. With as much hype as the series gets, I thought I would absolutely love this book. I would find a new favorite sci-fi dystopian series, and I actually had a hard time convincing myself to even continue on in the series. I liked it enough to warrant that. And I will say, I also read Unravel Me, which is the second book, liked it way more, so I like the series overall so far. But this first book was disappointing in that I really didn't like it as much. I wasn't really into it until at the very, very end, which was enough to get me to continue on. But that's why I put it on this list, is because of the disappointing factor rather than the dislike factor, because I did like it. I just didn't love it like I thought it would. The next book on this list is Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers. Again, I would say that I put this book on this list more for the disappointment factor than I did the dislike factor. I liked it enough, but it was disappointing and then I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. First off, I knew that this book wasn't like the movie. I think that's a pretty well-known fact that the book and the movie are very, very different. And there were some chapters in here that were in the movie. So that's not why I disliked it, or not necessarily disliked it. That's not why I was disappointed in it. I was disappointed because it didn't feel like a cohesive story, which is kind of what I wanted, which I know that's kind of weird, but it felt like a collection of short stories that Mary Poppins was in. And they just all happened to take place in the same household. But it didn't feel like a cohesive story. It was very broken up. And it just wasn't exactly what I was hoping it would be, which is why I put it on the list, because I was a little disappointed in it. I definitely think that like later on down the road when I have kids, this is a series that we may pick up and I'll read to them, or we can read together, because there are a lot more books in this series, but at this time I'm not planning on reading any of the other ones. The next book on this list may be another surprise to some people, and it was a surprise to me too. And that book is From Twinkle with Love by Zendaya Manon. This is a 2018 release. I really, really wanted to like this book. I loved her first book, When Dimple Met Rishi. I just didn't like this one that much. This book is about a girl named Twinkle who really loves making films, and she ends up deciding to enter this film into like their local town's film festival. And she partners up with this guy who's going to produce it, but Twinkle has a crush on the guy's twin brother. I cannot remember their names for the life of me right this second. And then Twinkle starts to think that maybe she has feelings for the other brother instead. I had a really hard time with this book. I really, really wanted to like this book because I loved the first book that this author wrote, like I said. But I really just did not like Twinkle's character. While I appreciated her kind of feminist viewpoint on things, and I appreciated her passion for filmmaking, I loved that element of the story, I really just disliked her as a character, and I didn't feel like she really grew a lot in the course of the book, and when she did, it was like really rushed. It was just like all of a sudden a light bulb went off and she changed, and it just didn't feel realistic in a way. I definitely realized while reading this book that while I did want to finish it, I never wanted to read it again. It was not a book that I ever saw myself reading again. I actually got rid of it, which is why you're seeing a picture instead of the real book. And I was really disappointed that I disliked this book because I really wanted to like it. And I know a lot of people did like it, which is great, but I just didn't. I definitely want to read Zendaya Manon's next book that comes out this year. I'm really excited about that one. But this one just didn't hit the mark for me. And the last book on my list of disappointing reads is A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. I recently talked about this in my December wrap-up, but this is a novella that takes place after A Court of Wings and Ruin. And this is supposed to be the bridge book between that first ACOTAR trilogy and the next installment in the series. I actually heard some mixed things about it, so it wasn't necessarily like that it was disappointing, because I wasn't really surprised by it, but I still didn't care for it that much. It was fine. It was fine. This book is basically a very short novella about Feyre and Rhys having sex around the winter solstice. Okay, I had to change angles, and this is kind of weird, but my camera died, and I'm not gonna have time to film this later, and I'm almost done, so bear with me. As I was kind of talking about, this book just basically felt like a short novella about Feyre and Rhys celebrating the winter solstice, which is very similar to the way that we celebrate Christmas. There's gifts, and Feyre did a lot of shopping, and Rhys spent a lot of time being horny, and then they had a lot of sex. And then there were like a couple of chapters from the perspective of Cassian and Nesta, who I think are going to be the main protagonists in the next series. yeah, I don't really understand why it was marketed as a bridge book. It basically just kind of felt like reading fan fiction by the same author. Nesta was a huge bitch most of the time, and I really didn't like her character in this book. It felt like a lot of the character development she went through kind of plummeted a bit. And I get why she felt the way she did with all the things she went through, but I still felt... I spent most of my time reading her parts angry. And Reese was so horny in this book that at times it was laughable because it was so cheesy. Yeah, I just didn't think that this really added anything to the series. I'm still gonna read the next series that she writes in this. I don't even know what it's called. It's like a series, but they have their own storylines. It's like trilogies within a series. I don't know, whatever. I'll read it because I do like the series, but I didn't care for this that much. It was fine, but it also didn't really add anything to the series in my opinion. So that's it for my disappointing / books I disliked reads of 2018 words. Let me know down in the comments any books that you were disappointed in 2018, because I love a good scandalous topic. And I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye.